Hey, this is Terry for Total Life Pursuit, and I'm going to talk to you about relationship today. This is lesson number 1 for relationships, and let's get to it. So, what is a relationship? That's what you first have to start off with, which is, what is the relationship? What is a relationship? And there's a lot of relationship. We're just thinking about people, but there's relationships between things. Let's go to the definition of relationship. The way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected. Or it can be the state of being connected by blood or by marriage. And number 3 definition is the way in which two or more people or groups regard and behave toward each other. In other words, like a landlord-tenant relationship. Relationship always talks about one thing in relation to another thing. Relationship is connection. So there's a connection that can be seen, and obviously we can see this in the family, we can see it in friendships, but bigger than that, we can see it in community as well, where you may not know somebody, but you are connected. You drive down their street, you come into their place of worship, or you go to their store, or something like that. So we are connected to each other, and that is relationship. There's relationship between the sun and the earth. There's relationship between water and plants. There's relationship between plants and air, right? The oxygen exchange. The wind and the sea, the animals and the ground, God to humans, and finally in creation, as you can tell I'm after, is humans to humans. Now there's different levels of relationship, and we all know this to be true. Let me talk to you about community for just 1 second. Community, a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common, like the scientific community. Community also can connote a feeling of fellowship with others. I thought that was interesting, a feeling of fellowship with others. As a strong sharing as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. In other words, like your church community or your slow pitch softball team community. Those things are common interests, common goals, so you're in community with one another, which means you're in relationships. So there are communal or community relationships. There's people that you don't know. There's people that you do know that you're just kind of acquainted with, the checker at your, Costco or your favorite store. And then there's friends. You know this person by name. You have their phone number in your phone book kind of thing. I guess you don't have a phone book. I'm old. We used to have these little phone books. You'd press a thing and it'd flop up. It was terrific. That was before Rolodex. But now we have everything on our phone, so we don't have to remember anybody's phone number. But that's mental. That's not relational. Here we go. Friends that you know, and then there are close friends. There are people who you would let borrow your car or your things, or you would lend them a lot of money. Those people are close friends. Then you have family relationships. So those are communal or community relationships. Then you have family relationships. You could be disconnected or distant. A second cousin that lives in Missouri that you don't really see but once every 3 years, something like that. Then you have familiar relationships or family relationships. So you have relationships between brother and sister. The immediate relationships you have is between brother and sister. So siblings, parent, child, and I included in there grandparents. I know some people don't really see their grandparents. I didn't even have grandparents. My grandpa died when I was 5. And my grandma died when I was 17. I didn't have another set of grandparents. So we have immediate family relationships, familiar relationships, the people who we see, the aunts and uncles. And then we have those distant second cousin removes. I've still never really figured out what a removed second cousin is. Anyways, Then we have romantic relationships. And then we have self-relationship. Why'd you include that? Because there is a relationship with oneself. Most people talk to themselves. I mean, it's just fact. If you answer, that might be an issue, but most people do talk to themselves. It's not an issue. I answer myself all the time, especially if I ask an easy question. But you definitely have a relationship with yourself. And last, but certainly not least, is you have a relationship with your Creator. You have a relationship with your Creator. Your Creator and you, whether you believe in Him or not, are in relationship. It's just whether you're distant or unknowing or you're very close. It's okay to have different levels of relationship. Obviously, the people who live in Missouri or Ohio, you don't have as close a relationship as those who live in your house. The people who you were really close to, but they live in Northern California, you live in Southern California, you may be closer with somebody who's in the closer proximity to you, or maybe not. I don't know. The one thing I do know is we're created for relationships. That's why we have them, because we're created for them. You know, God gave us His image. In His image, relationships. He loves relationships. He created us with a love for relationships. In fact, our physical health, our mental health, the ability to recover after surgery or some sort of malady happened to us, achieving success, financial health, and certainly spiritual health all relies on relationships. It's not the only factor, obviously, but it is a factor, and I don't know that we take it into consideration. Like, for instance, physical health. Berkman and Syme in 1979, so this is ages and ages ago, we should all know this by now, showed that the risk of death among men and women with fewer social ties was more than twice as high as the risk for adults with the most social ties. Moreover, this finding held that when socioeconomic status, health behavior, and other variables that might influence morality or mortality were taken into account, social ties also reduced mortality risk among adults with documented medical conditions. So there was another one. They found that among adults with coronary artery disease, the socially isolated had a risk of subsequent heart attack death 2.4 times higher than those who were more socially connected. In other words, the more friends you have, the more connected that you are, the better your chance for living long and living well. So there are a lot of different studies that I could name here, but let me just give you something else. That social ties reduce blood cholesterol, they reduce blood pressure, they reduce heart rate, they reduce stress hormones. So you're less stressed out if you have connections with people. Now you're saying, wait a second, the people I have connection with are stressing me out. That's going to be another teaching, okay? Healthy relationships support stress reduction, and they do all of these other great things in your body. How does that happen? That's how we're created. I mean, I could break it down biochemically to you, but let me just say this. We were created for relationship. We're created for connection. So it's no wonder that we operate optimally when we have connection. Does that make sense to you? Okay, healthy relationships give you a sense of purpose and give you a sense of belonging, which everyone wants and needs. So it should be no shock that mental health is also affected by social relationships. In fact, a study of a relative lack of social ties is associated with depression and later life cognitive decline. Now, I don't know about you. Number one, I hate being depressed, and there's a lot of people who struggle with it. Social interaction is one of the things that is going to help you. Number two, cognitive decline. Nobody wants to be the main actor or the subject of that Notebook movie. You know that Notebook movie, you cry at the end all the time. Nobody wants to be on that movie. No one wants to be that lady. Nobody. So I'm telling you that social connections and relationships are one of the great keys. Okay, it's a quality of life issue. There was a sobering report in the Journal of Health Psychology. Sheds light on the troubles about mates. How about this? Check this out. Study looked at quality of relationships and cardiovascular risk, and they measured levels of inflammation, markers important in the development of heart disease. What they found was striking. Among both men and women, a sense that a spouse was not supportive or listening well was associated with increased inflammation, even when considering other factors that could influence the health. As an example would be coming home to discuss a stressful day and feeling like your husband isn't really interested. Additionally, when spouses perceive that their partners were not engaged when describing something good that happened to them, they had increased levels of fibrinogen. Thank you. I can read. Seriously. I learned it in elementary school. Fibrinogen. Okay, a risk factor for heart disease. In other words, if you have a marriage where you're not supportive and listening to one another, your heart disease rate goes up. This is kind of incredible, isn't it? Choose well, young people. Choose very, very well. So, relationships support your whole life. Relationships support your whole life. Bad relationships are toxic, and they can destroy your life. Now, we know this sociologically, that when you have a terrible relationship with a spouse or with a mother or father that's really toxic, it really messes you up. And it does, okay? So why do we allow that in our life? That's really a really good question. That's going to be covered on another teaching. But I do have some thoughts I want to share with you. Some would say it's that we think we deserve it. In other words, we allow relationships in our lives that we think we deserve. If we do not believe that we should not be abused, offended, talked down to, if we don't believe that, we won't be in that relationship. That's toxic. Why would I want that toxicity in my life? It's kind of like, I should use poison instead of dog do as an anecdote. But look, if there's just a little bit of poison and you put it in the brownies, are you going to eat the brownies? It's just a little bit of poison spread all throughout the brownie. Little bit of cyanide. It's just a little bit. You're going to eat it? You're not going to eat it. So why do we put up with the toxic? Why do we allow that to happen? I think part of it is we think we deserve it. The other part, it's all we know. Some people just were raised in a family and that's all they knew was just toxic stuff. Are you ever around families that just yell at one another? It's just yelling like that. It's like, give me the coffee! Give me some cream! It's kind of funny, actually. Sad, but funny. That was my darker side that said it was funny. It is sad. But the reality is, that's what they know. That's what they were raised with. They don't know any better. But we do know better. Hopefully you do know better. I know better because we were meant to love one another. And love doesn't yell at somebody for coffee or cream. Love prefers the other person. Listen, in 1 John 4, 7 and 8, dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, because God is love. This should make sense. He put his image in us, so therefore if we are like him, we are lovers. That's what we do. You say, well, I gave my life to Christ, but I'm not much of a lover. You've got an issue, don't you? And you probably got an issue with you and God rather than you and that other person that you don't like, or that doesn't get along with you, or that other person, or that other person, or that other person. Love flows from us naturally. Let me read you another verse. We love because he first loved us. 1 John 4:19 through 21. If anyone says, I love God, and he hates his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And he has given us this command: whoever loves God must also love his brother. Oh, that kind of hurt, Terry. What if our brother's an idiot? You still love him. You just said don't get in toxic relationship. You can still love them. You can still love them. But allowing them into your life to breathe toxicity, you don't have to do that. And we'll talk about that later. See, when toxic thoughts dominate our thinking about relationships, then we tend to not allow the natural flow of love into our mind and our heart and our will. See, we have these thoughts that we bring into life. Let's just say life with God. We have these thoughts, and they're in our brain. That's why he wants to renew our thinking. But they're in our brain. They're actual physical structures in our brain. So when we bring those in, they don't just magically disappear, okay? They are still there. Our problem is we operate in them like it's our normal. Well, I know I'm supposed to be loving, but what? When you're not loving, you're in biochemical chaos inside your brain and inside your body, because we were made, as Toby Mack says, we were made to love. That's what we were made to do. So when we don't love, when we hate, when we have bitterness, when we have offense, when we have unforgiveness and hold grudges, then we are in biochemical chaos inside of our brains and inside of our bodies. Listen to what Dr. Leaf says in Think, Learn, and Succeed. Essentially, the way you think through the mindsets you adopt will influence the neural correlates in your brain, thereby influencing your words and actions. In turn, these words and actions influence the brain, and a feedback loop is established based on this mindset. A feedback loop can be changed at any time you desire through your choice and a change of mindset. So what feedback loop do you want? As with any of my teachings, if you ever heard me, here's what I'm going to tell you. You're not a victim. You have the power to choose, because you're in charge. You get to be who you want to be. If you've given your life to Christ, quadruple that, sextuple that. I mean, to the infinity power that, because there's nothing that you can't do. But God has still given us abilities to choose what is right. Choose to be loving. Choose to be connected. Choose to be in relationship. Even if you are damaged, or years of terrible relationships, terrible thoughts that you've had about relationships, self-protective thoughts. I'm never going to do that. You've made vows to yourself when you're 8 years old, 9 years old, 16 years old, when that guy broke up with you, whatever. You made a vow. I'm never going to let that happen to me again. And ever since then, you've never let somebody in. Well, I'm telling you, you can let somebody in. It's your choice. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I'm pretty normal. I'm normal. I don't have any hang-ups from my past. I was raised pretty well. Okay, you need to change too. Okay, here's why. I'm 58, so I know if you're younger than me, you grew up in a divorce culture. And I'm not talking about just marriage divorce. I'm talking about friendship divorce. You don't like somebody, you just don't hang out with them anymore. Now it's even worse. You don't like somebody, you tell everybody on Facebook or Instagram or all the other social medias, and then you don't hang out with them anymore. It's crazy what we do in this culture. We just divorce people. It's like that, who was it? The Hatfields and the McCoys, right? The Hatfields and the McCoys. Look it up in history. But the reality is they just hated one another, and everybody after them in their lineage hated the other family. They all hated. Why? Well, because my daddy did it. That's the deal. That's the problem, is because other people will hate because you hate. And if you're a father or a grandfather or an uncle and you express hatred, if you express bitterness and unforgiveness, then guess what? You're going to pass it down. If not sociologically and quantumly, I'm not going to go into that, but you will epigenetically, if you're a father or a mother, you'll pass it down. So don't pass it down. Who wants that for their kids? Nobody wants that for their kids. Come on. The other reason you need to change, there's three other. The fake community. It's like the fake news, the fake news. This is fake community. What's that? Entertainment world. It's like we know all of these people, like the Kardashians, right? Like we know them. Like if we saw them, it's like, oh, Kim, like she would know us. She doesn't know us. And then social media is equally, how many friends do you have? I don't know. I have over 1,000 friends. You do? Yeah. What are their names? I couldn't tell you, but people who are actually my friends. I don't know why they called them friends, but they're not friends and it's not your community. I'm not saying that you can't have a community online and be helpful to one another. You can. I think you get what I'm saying is that it's a false sense of community. So you've got to overcome that. Number 3, our drive for sexual satisfaction has taught us that nothing or not much is sacred and worth holding on to. And therefore, we believe all we have to give is commonplace. It's a sexual revolution gone bad. You see, when we think that there is nothing sacred about us, that we can hold back nothing except to give to somebody absolutely special, then we are common. That's who we are. And that really mars the soul of a person. So we've got to overcome that. And then lastly, our relationships have become more and more self-centered. Like we get into relationships for what that person can do for us. Oh, you're a CEO? Hey, you want to go to a game together? You know what I'm saying? I mean, we want to reach out to somebody who can get us up to the next level in our desires. Not a friend who can encourage us up to the next level because they've attained it. I mean somebody who can just promote us. As a Christian, I know promotion comes from the Lord. I'm not looking for any one person or group of people to promote me. I'm looking for God to promote me. But if you have, let me give you a real example over what I just said, is if we know relationships improve physical health, right? So if you enter a relationship for the purpose of improving your physical health, that's self-centered. You see, if you have a good relationship with somebody, the byproduct is you have good physical health. This is just a caveat. This is something that I wanted to show you that is in the creation, that we have relationships and good things happen. So we have to think about relationships, and that's what you're going to do with the material that you have. We're going to think about relationships. We're going to try to understand what our real heart philosophy is on relationships. You always do that. Yeah, you've got to understand where you're coming from, and you've got to understand what you're thinking, because where you're coming from is a byproduct of what you have thought. And then you get to change your thinking. Hello? You don't have to think like that anymore. We're going to change our thinking. I want to end with one story. As a pastor, I've had a few people leave the church over the years. I've been doing this about 25 years now, and people just leave the church. And a lot of times they leave it and they blame me. I'm not good enough at this. I didn't do this well enough. I didn't blah, blah, blah. And, sometimes they're right. Quite honestly, I didn't do it well enough. But I am human. My name is not Jesus. My title is not Christ. And so I'm human. I mess up, and I don't want to mess up, but I do. So they leave the church. And some of them have left pretty disgruntled, and they gossip to everybody else about what I didn't do right. It's really hurtful. I mean, I got a soft heart, and that's really hurtful to me. And I remember saying to God years and years ago, after this happened a few times, I'm like, I'm done. I am done. I am going to be one of those pastors that you cannot get to know. I'm going to be standing. I'm going to be like one of those churches where the pastor sits in a pulpit that's like 18 feet high and 25 feet in front of everybody. I'm going to be that emotionally, and nobody is going to get to me. And God said, Judas. My son loved Judas. My son had a relationship with Judas. My son fed Judas. My son took Judas on retreats. My son did ministry with Judas. And he betrayed him, and he knew he would. Well, now what am I supposed to do? I mean, I want to be like Jesus. The only thing I could do, okay, Lord, I'm just going to love people, and I'm going to let them in. I'm not going to give myself to them, but I'm going to allow relationship to happen with them. So that is my hope for you. And not only that every relationship, whether it's community or familial or your relationship with God, would get better because of what you're going to do these next weeks. This is Terry, Total Life Pursuit. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.